Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 6 on USA conflict 1954 to 1975. And the previous video, ladies and gentlemen, we were looking at the events in Montgomery in the state of Alabama in the Montgomery Bus Boycott. We looked at what happened. This video, split into two parts, we're looking at what happened after, what happened next in the Montgomery Bus Boycott. In other words, how significant and how important it was. And we're also going to look at the reasons for the success of the bus boycott. Now, I think we'll start with that. We'll start with the success of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. Now, if you remember, it was all to do with people, black people, not being treated equally on the buses by the Montgomery Bus Company. Now, that word there, ladies and gentlemen, company, if you use the letters of that word, company, from Montgomery Bus Company, you can actually, hopefully, remember some of the reasons why the bus boycott was such a success. Here we are again, as happy as can be, all good friends and jolly good company. Company. Well, let's have a look. There's the letters, company. And here are the reasons, ladies and gentlemen, why the Montgomery Bus Boycott was such a success. Commitment, organisation, money, publicity, activists, non-violence, year-long. Company. So let's have a look at them. C for commitment. The people involved did not give up. They faced huge problems. They faced threats, they faced violence, they faced bombs, they faced losing their jobs, losing the ability to take a loan from the bank, but yet they carried on. They showed commitment. One of the reasons for the success. Second one, O for organisation. Ladies and gentlemen, one of my favourite films, a great film. Have you ever seen it? Chicken Run. Have you ever seen it? Great film. And there's a couple of sentences in that. It says, those chickens are up to something. They're organised. Organisation was very, very important. The civil rights groups in Montgomery, first of all the WPC, the Women's Political Council, and then the MIA, the Montgomery Improvement Association, they organised a very well-run campaign. For example, the carpool and the car share scheme, all set up and organised. The M for money. Money, 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 must be funny. It's a rich man's world. Money was vital. And the finances came into two elements in the Montgomery Bus Boycott. First of all, financial support for the civil rights activists coming from all parts of America. So support to allow them to carry on the boycott, to run the carpool scheme, for example. So that's one element. And also, she's got a ticket to ride. Classic Beatles. You've got to buy a ticket if you get on a bus. But the Montgomery Bus Company was losing about 20 or 30,000 fares per day because the black people were not getting on and buying a ticket to ride. So the Montgomery Bus Company was actually losing money. That's an important element of the eventual success of the boycott. P for publicity. Now, publicity works on two levels. First of all, the local level, church meetings, local newspapers, local leaflets, and yes, they were important. That links into the organisation. So the civil rights activists got local publicity, but they are also beginning to get national publicity across America. So again, we see publicity helps their eventual success. Now, I've mentioned civil rights activists, the A for activists. Now, obviously, there's Mrs. Robinson, there's a man called Dixon, a man called Abernathy, and then the most famous of all, Martin Luther King Jr. I'll talk about him later on in the video. But all of these activists showed great leadership. One, they were very brave because they're facing violence and threats. Two, they're making good decisions. And three, they are organised. They are showing the commitment to carry it on. The N of company, non-violence. The people involved were trained not to react violently if they themselves were threatened or if they themselves were attacked. Now, that was quite difficult to do, but it was important because it earned people's respect across America, linking into the idea of publicity. And the final one, why? It was a year-long boycott, ladies and gentlemen. Originally just planned for one day. How many days did it last? Bonus marks if you said 381. That shows the commitment. Of course, for every day that the boycott is going on, the bus company are losing more and more money. Can you see how many of these reasons why the boycott was successful? Can you see that many of them are linked together? Hopefully, if you remember the word company from Montgomery Bus Company, then you'll hopefully remember the reasons why the boycott was successful. Now, second part of the video. What happened next? In other words, why was the boycott so significant? Why was it so important? Well, here's a few for you to think about. Number one, it was another step along the way to desegregation. It was following on from the Supreme Court case of Brown versus Topeka in the state of Kansas. It showed the civil activists, the civil rights activists, gain yet another success in the Supreme Court. Browder versus Gale. Remember, Mayor Gale, the mayor of Montgomery. Well, I suppose after he lost the case, I suppose you could argue he was blown out of court. Mayor Gale, blown out of court. Sorry, I apologise. But the important thing here is it was another win for the civil rights activists. They'd used the same law, the 14th Amendment, the one which spoke about equality for all citizens. They'd used it and won in Brown versus Topeka up in Kansas, and now they used it and won in Crowder versus Gale. Sorry, not Crowder, Browder versus Gale down in Alabama. It shows that the law and the Constitution of the United States of America seem to be supporting their struggle. And that was an important development. A few minutes ago I mentioned Martin Luther King. The Montgomery Bus Boycott is important because it brings him to the forefront. It establishes Martin Luther King as a very important civil rights activist, and he was to go on and then do other things around civil rights around the rest of America. Why was he so important? Well, here's a few things. One, he's showing that his idea of non-violence could work. It could cut through. It could get the message across and be effective. King was a great speaker, a superb motivational speaker. He was speaking about Christian values, love, peace, humility. He's appealing not just to one section, maybe the black people, he's appealing to a wider range, blacks and whites. He's a good organiser. He appears to be a very, very powerful force for change. So that's very significant from the Montgomery Bus Boycott. Already hinted at it, but one of the importances of Montgomery was it showed the importance of publicity and organisation. And what they did in Montgomery was followed, for example, in Little Rock in Arkansas. It's sort of setting a template for how to organise your struggle for civil rights. It also helped the civil rights movement by the very fact that some white people reacted very aggressively and very violently. So it's showing more moderate whites across America what the black people actually had to put up with in the southern states. So there are some reasons why Montgomery was so important and so significant. Well, what happened next? The boycott ended 21st of December 1956 after the Supreme Court appeal again stood up for the 14th Amendment. King, Abernathy and other civil rights activists went on the buses. There were photographs sitting next to white people. They had the law on their side. They had won. But there was a violent reaction by certain white people in Alabama, in Montgomery. Many activists' homes were bombed. Many of the churches where the black people went were bombed. Shots were fired at black people trying to get on the buses. 7 people from the White Citizens Council were arrested and put on trial for this violence, but found not guilty. Why, ladies and gentlemen? An all-white jury. So, also, final thing, if you remember back to the previous video, one of the problems was that bus drivers were very rude and aggressive. They were all white. Well, despite the change in the law, no black bus drivers were employed. So yes, they've won the Supreme Court decision, but change is coming very, very slowly. So that's one thing that happened after the 21st of December. The second thing, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, coordinating all the churches and their protest across the southern states, led by King and Abernathy, 2 of the main civil rights activists from the Montgomery Bus Boycott. Now, what was their aim, ladies and gentlemen? Well, they had a few. First of all, no segregation. They're quite clear on that. We cannot allow segregation. The Supreme Court is showing us that. Use mass action, mass protest to get your point across, but always use non-violence. And try as much as possible to appeal to black and white. Get members from the black community and the white community into this church organisation. Notice again, King organising. And really the SCLC, their first real effort was aimed at improving black voting. I did a little thing in video number 2 about the tests that people had to pass before they were even registered to vote. So this organisation helps to prepare black people to try to pass these tests. Something else that they did, again that key word, organise. They organised the Crusade for Citizenship, where they marched to the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. in 1958. So that was another development, another significant occurrence after the Montgomery Bus Boycott, the SCLC. And the final thing, ladies and gentlemen, again, using the law, using the Constitution and the law. of America. We come to the Civil Rights Act 1957. Well, following the two Supreme Court decisions of Brown versus Topeka, Browder versus Gale, it showed that there was increased public support for civil rights. And they said, right, we've got to pass new laws and put them through the House of Congress. President Eisenhower, he was against using the law. He said, look, I don't think it's right to use the law to force people to do something. I would prefer to try to change their mind. So he was not in favour of the Civil Rights Act. The Act itself, the main aim was to increase the number of black voters. Many politicians spoke against it. Republican and Democrat, both of the main parties in America, particularly in the southern states. Even the Democrats, who were more sort of moderate, they were called Dixiecrats, showing their link to the southern states of America. And they were against it, and they tried all sorts of tactics to try to stop this law passing through the House of Congress. One of them, a man called Strom Thurmond. Come on, get his name right. Strom Thurmond. What a name, Strom. Anyway, he used a special tactic called filibuster. And that is, we have it in our House of Parliament today. Sometimes MPs, or in this case representatives, will talk and talk and talk and talk. Well, it's like being in one of my old lessons. And Thurmond spoke for 24 hours and 18 minutes to try to delay the passage of this law. In the end, though, it did not work. And on the 9th of September 1957, the Civil Rights Act was passed. Now, what did it say? It said, look, the federal courts can prosecute any states, particularly southern states, if they are violating voters' rights. In other words, stopping black people from voting. So again, you can say, hooray, it's another win. The law is on the side of the civil rights. They're trying to increase the number of black voters. So it did show that the federal government was supporting progress in civil rights. But the way it was set up said, right, if the southern state is going against this new law, you would have to have a trial. Fair enough, you would say. But it's a trial by jury. And down in the southern states, the jury would be all white. And people feared that an all-white jury would never allow this law to pass. So the Civil Rights Act 1957 was a start, because it showed that the federal courts are getting involved on the side of progress for civil rights. At the same time, though, it showed that down in the southern states, they would be able to oppose, ignore, or slow down the progress of civil rights. 3 years later, by 1960, there was an increase in the number of black voters. And you would say, right, that's showing that the law is working, the Civil Rights Act. Only 3%, ladies and gentlemen. So it showed there was still a long way to go. So there we have it. We've looked at quite a few steps along the way. We've looked at Brown versus Topeka. We've looked at the Montgomery Bus Boycott. We've looked at the Little Rock Nine. You could argue that those three were stages on the path to progress for civil rights. But I've hinted in these videos that progress was slow. There was a lot of opposition. And ladies and gentlemen, it's the opposition that I'll concentrate on in the next video. As ever, I hope this has been useful. I'll see you soon for opposition to civil rights progress in the 1950s. All the best now.